episode number 3 of The Detective. In this episode, the Spaniard gets Federico good and armed for the fight to come. Federico takes on yet another new identity, but all the disguises in the universe can't hide his mercenary past and the things that he's done. It all comes back to haunt him next on The Detective, episode number 3. Welcome to the serialized audiobook, The Detective. Written by Scott Sigler and Matt Wallace. Narrated by Scott Sigler. Hello, junkies! Oh man, am I glad to be back deep in your ears. Currently, I am working on the final draft of GFL Book 6, The Gangster, and I'm also working on Mount Fitzroy, the sequel to Earthcore. It's one hell of a busy month with DragonCon coming at the end of the month. If you're going to DragonCon, come and see your boy. My nephew is playing in the National Football League. That's right, he's in the NFL. I will tell you all about that after the episode. For now, let's get into Fred's bad dreams. It's The Reef, episode number 3. Let's go! Chapter 10. The History of a People. The McCovey Archives was a plain brown building forgotten by most. If Fred had learned one thing during his time in the mines, it was that the majority of people on this colony put little value on the past. Or the future, for that matter. They had nothing but the present. Here, life was short, and every moment had teeth of 100 different shapes and sizes. People started each day wondering if they'd live to see the dawn. Fred always expected more resistance when it came to penetrating government buildings. There was usually better security, and there was always more bullshit and bureaucracy. He was no master thief, no great cat burglar. He very rarely scaled walls or ziplined onto rooftops. His specialty was walking right through the front door and receiving a nod and a wave from every uniform he encountered. To do that here, he would need to have a good disguise and the documents to back it up. Fred started by spending some time at the McCovey coroner's office. It was a busy place. He posed as a mining rep, from Akma drilling, not Ringgold, saying he would stay out of the way. He just wanted to find methods to streamline the body delivery process. The first part of that, stay out of the way, was what the overworked coroner's office staff wanted to hear. The second part, streamline, was also music to their ears. If he could save them some work, even a little, they were happy to tolerate his presence. He learned what he needed to learn. The coroner was one of a few official offices that would have a reason to request access to the archive's records, although he noticed they rarely did. Fred took note of their procedures, and he took special note of the coroner's office workers themselves. He watched how they behaved and how people were used to them behaving. After that, it was a simple matter of forging the right credentials and papers and acquiring the right clothing. A few touches from his masquerade kit did the rest. When Fred walked through the rickety double doors of the archives, he was Dr. Edward Howe, assistant coroner. He was there to request files on a minor shipping magnate that died 2 weeks ago. The magnate had been a wealthy man, and 2 different women, both of whom had some pull with the shot caller in McCovey, were presenting as his wife and attempting to claim the body. Only the official family records could help the coroner's office clear things up. There was a single office clerk on duty at the archive's front desk. Fred had waited until the last shift to make his move, when staff was minimal. The rest of those on duty at this time were mostly janitorial staff. The clerk was a younger man, his attention fixed on a portable screen in his hands. From the sound, Fred thought he was watching a sporting event. Fred approached the desk. "Hi there, Chief. I'm from the coroner's office, and dropping off or picking up." The clerk was less than interested. He didn't even take his eyes off the screen. "Well," Fred began, a little thrown, "I need to locate some records on—" "Records rooms down that hall," the clerk said, with a single jerk of his head to a large archway to the right. Fred looked at the entrance the kid had indicated. There wasn't even a door between them and the hallway beyond. The pragmatic part of him couldn't accept how easy this seemed, and maybe didn't want to accept that he had spent 4 days preparing his disguise and cover story for this. "Do you need me to fill out a form or something?" The clerk finally looked up. "Look, man, if you can find whatever you need, you might as well just take it before it rots back there with the rest. Just don't expect me to know where to point you. I'm third shift. I've never even been in there." "Thanks," Fred said and walked down the hall. Yep, 4 days wasted. That's what he got for not scouting the full mission before diving into preparation for a single part of it. The records room was suffering from terminal neglect. It was a tomb of scattered hard and soft copies that seemed to have almost no remaining order to any of it. A few moments of study made him realize the fact that looking for 20-year-old files was actually going to work in his favor. The older records were in much better shape than the more recent filings. It seemed as if the Mucovy Archives was a system progressively breaking down, and its condition had accelerated drastically in the last few years. Hacking their database proved to be the easy part. The technology was decades out of date, and there was little information here that anyone cared to protect. Most of the rich probably had their records kept elsewhere. Hell, they probably had their own system to handle deaths, even their own coroner. That was the way of things on Mucovy. He tapped into the computer records. He attached a worm disk to the interface and set it to run, cross-referencing Quentin's DNA with the names Quentin Barnes and Quincy Carbonaro. The program found a hit almost immediately: Killian Carbonaro. As Fred looked at the data, he understood why. Killian had been in the Purist Nation military. The nation didn't keep closed records on non-church citizens unless you were in the armed forces. Killian's DNA, just like Fred's, had been recorded as the main tracker for his military record. The common DNA sequences left no question. This was Quentin's father. Fred called up Killian's record, only to find that most of it was blank. His military record showed a date of induction, boot camp, and then nothing. "Killian, my friend, what kind of work did they have you doing?" Possibly something high level, something secret. No discipline record, no deployment record, no commendations, health exams, nothing. A soldier with no military history? Such a thing didn't exist. Fred found a link to Killian's family. He let out a slow breath as he clicked it. This information was also blank. He had hit a dead end. There wasn't much in the family record, but it wasn't blank. It read, Killian Carbonaro, birth date 2638, no death date. Wife, Constance Carbonaro, birth date 2637, no death date. Daughter, Janine Carbonaro, birth date 2654, no death date. Son, Quade Carbonaro, deceased, 2657 to 2657. Son, Quincy Carbonaro, deceased, 2659 to 2668. Son, Quentin Carbonaro, deceased, 2664 to 2669. No links, just names. No way to find out more about any of them, at least not from this record. Fred stared at the readout. It made him feel sad, but also hopeful. Sad because of so much loss. One boy who didn't make it past his first year, another dead at 9 years old for stealing bread. Quentin was marked as dead, but that was probably a records error at the overburdened orphanage system. Maybe someone had done that as a kindness, to try and free him of his brother's debt. Whatever the reason, a 5-year-old Quentin had been given a new name, and that new name had separated him from any connection with his real heritage. Hopeful because there was no death record for the father, the mother, and the sister. Why hadn't Quentin ever mentioned a sister? Fred finally had something to work with. The computer database had nothing else, but he was surrounded by several tons of paper. Hard copy records that had probably never been entered into the computer. Paper. Just amazing how backward this place was. Fortunately, Fred came prepared. He dug a small rectangular device with an adhesive back from his kit. It was a combination high-intensity X-ray scanner and data retrieval program. Once attached, it would read every page in a stack 5 feet deep and scan each one for pre-programmed keywords and phrases. He entered the names into the scanner. That was the easy part. The real work that night turned out to be separating and stacking files so Fred could scan them. After 10 minutes, he felt more like a mover than a military-trained private investigator. He was also working up a hell of a sweat. Maybe he should hire an assistant. In the movies, the investigator always had a young assistant who was willing to do the grunt work. He often entertained that thought, and, just as often, he chased it away. He had a lonely job, but at least he didn't have to bury anyone else. You work with someone, you get close to them. You get close to someone, you lose them. Fred never wanted to get close to anyone ever again. After 3 hours, he was beginning to consider he might be at this all night with no results when the scanner lit up in a deep, affirmative green. That meant a hit. He lifted the scanner from a stack of folders and checked its readout. The small screen displayed an image of a faded document that included the name Carbonaro. It also told Fred how deep into the current stack the image was taken. What Fred pulled from the stack turned out to be an official death record, but one that hadn't been fully filled out. Why can't it ever just be easy? The form had a last name, Carbonaro, and a sex designation, female, but no first name. There was also a destination for the remains, Grim Tyrant Valley. Which one was it, Constance or Janine? One of them was dead. Which would be worse news for Quentin, his mother or his sister? And what news did Fred have, really? Your mother or sister is dead for certain, but the other one is probably dead as well, even though I don't have a record of it. And, come to think of it, your father is also probably gone, because M'Covey is the armpit of a system that is the armpit of the galaxy. No death record didn't mean a lot on M'Covey. You were lucky if you got a grave, luckier if anyone documented your passing. Killian was probably just as dead as his wife, just as dead as his sons, just as dead as his daughter. No matter which one, sister or mother, Fred knew Quentin would be crushed. A starting Tier 1 quarterback, the face of a franchise, watched by billions and worshipped by millions. Yet for all of that, he was just a 20-year-old kid. Fred examined the piece of paper closer. There was a date field, but that corner had been torn off the form. There was one more field filled out. Remains received by Alistair Britton, Grim Tyrant Valley Sexton. Fred started to put the piece of paper back where it belonged when he heard the distinctive rush of air behind him. He only had a second to react, but it was more than enough. He picked up the biggest stack of files he could heft and swung it 180 degrees. It collided with the small, winged body that was attempting to dive-bomb the base of Fred's skull and sent it careening into the wall of the records room. That body hit hard and fluttered disjointedly to the floor. Fred reached under his coat and unsheathed his concealed karambit. He walked over to the body, reached down, and grabbed the thing by its wing, lifting and pinning it to the wall. "Ghoulie, we gotta stop meeting like this."
"You've damaged 2 of my sensory pits, you ground-walking, milk-fed geshat."
The final word was a garble. It had to be a hurrah insult that a speaker box couldn't accurately translate. "You kiss your mother with that mouth? That is, if I even have mothers. I gotta read up on my interspecies biology." Something metallic caught Fred's eye. He glanced at the floor. Down there was a small needle attached to a curved handle that fit the hurrah's mouth flaps. It was a syringe gun. If Ghoulie had gotten close enough, that needle would have probably gone right into Fred's back. "Ghoulie, what's in the syringe?"
"What syringe?"
Fred actually laughed and was surprised by the sound. "You know, Ghoulie, I should clip these wings of yours, but I'm not going to do that. Do you know why?"
"Because you know I'm connected and that you'd be killed for it?"
"No. And you're not really that connected, Ghoulie, or you wouldn't be doing a job on shucking M'Covey, where your kind would be killed by most of the sentients here. I'm guessing you're here because you owe someone a favor, someone powerful. Am I right?
Then I don't know why you're not going to clip me,
he said, avoiding the question about who had hired him. I'm not going to kill you out of professional courtesy, Fred said. Whatever else you might be, you're a specialist, like me, a very skilled one at that. And that's something I value even if you don't. For once, Ghoulie seemed speechless. Perhaps it was because he couldn't tell if Fred was being honest. Fred then slowly twisted Ghoulie's wing until the little hurrah hissed in pain. However, Fred said, professional courtesy extends only so far. I'm going to pretend that whatever is in that syringe wouldn't do me any harm, because if I found out you were trying to kill me, let's just say that Scalorno are not the only species that likes the taste of hurrah. You keep putting yourself in front of me, and your second-story days will be over. Fred pantomimed slicing the wings from Ghoulie's body to emphasize the point, then released him. Ghoulie's wings began undulating in counterclockwise circles. They carried him up into the air and backed him slowly away from Fred.
You're a good sentient, Rico,
Ghoulie said.
Too good for our line of business. I wish I could thank you for giving me a break just now.
Why don't you? Manners are an important part of civilized interaction.
Because I don't think I'll get the chance,
Ghoulie said. What's that supposed to mean? A shock stick lit up his hand, making him drop the karambit as a huge human arm slid in fast around his neck. The big body attached to that arm drove Fred face first into the records room wall. Fast, strong, experienced, Fred knew he was in trouble. He couldn't get to his blades. The man's weight pressed him into the wall, and the big left arm around his throat started to squeeze boa constrictor tight until both blood and oxygen were cut off. Fred felt the darkness coming on. If he didn't move fast, he would never move again. Stay calm and act. You have at least 5 seconds until you pass out. His hand slithered up, trembling but steady as they sought his attacker's left arm, the one securing his head. Fred closed his fists around the man's wrist. The grip in which he was caught was as solid as a statue's, but Fred dug his fingers into the nerves there, mining them with his fingernails until he heard the man hiss in surprised pain. The chokehold loosened. Fred pushed off the wall as hard as he could, simultaneously twisting to the right, toward the man, his cheek now on the man's chest. That released the pressure on his windpipe. He sucked in a big breath, felt the blood rush to his brain, but he was still in a steel-strong headlock. Fred's hands shot inside his coat for his knives, but before he could pull them free, a giant right fist slammed into his mouth. A second blow broke his nose, made him see swirls of black. He felt the man rear back for a third blast. Desperate, Fred grabbed at the hand holding him in the headlock, isolated a finger, and yanked. The sound of a pinky snapping joined the man's deep scream of pain. The headlock finally released. Fred drove his elbow up and back. He expected the solid impact of bone on bone, but his elbow hissed through open air. The man had ducked, the move of a boxer bending at the knees. Fred never saw the man's face, but the feel of that move alone gave him a split-second warning as to what was coming next. Enough time to know he was in trouble, not enough time to do anything about it. The uppercut caught him under the tip of the chin, snapping his head back, lifting him off his feet and throwing him into a stack of files. He flailed weakly as paper poured down on and around him. He moved like a drunken man swimming, trying to find some way to stand. The room spun. He couldn't see. My knives. His hands slid to his sheaths. Each came out holding a blade. He blinked madly as he waved the knives at nothing, stabbed them in the direction of the big man, hoping to catch the enemy coming in. Fred's feet found their way beneath him. He stumbled to a crouching stance, still swinging and stabbing and slashing at whatever might come his way. A few more blinks, and his head cleared a little. He could see again, see enough to know he was alone. The big man was gone. Fred had never seen the man's face. Fred looked to the stack of papers where he'd been working on the incomplete death form. The piece of paper was gone. So, too, was his worm device. Ghoulie, you crafty bastard. Hey, mister, called a familiar voice from the other side of the records room. It was the clerk from the lobby. What are you doing back here? If you break anything, it's going to be my ass. Fred realized the lazy clerk might well have inadvertently saved his life. Maybe the big man in the suit didn't want to kill someone in front of a government witness. Whatever the reason, Fred wasn't sticking around to find out. He stood on rubber legs. The clerk saw the knives in his hands. "Hey," he said, backing away. Just take it easy. No need for that." Fred sneezed, felt globs of blood land on his chin. He slid the knives back into their sheaths. He forced his feet, which suddenly seemed to be made of wet clay, to start running to carry him out of the records room. The clerk made some kind of protest, but it was a half-hearted protest at best. Few people wanted to press an argument with someone who carried big knives. Maybe Fred hadn't scouted the clerk, but he had cased the building. There were 3 ways out. He opted for a back door that led to a parking area. By the time he reached that door, his head had fully cleared, allowing him to both see straight and to fully experience the newfound pain radiating through his nose and face. He looked outside. He didn't see the big man or ghoulie, just the usual stream of robed Makovians and the endless parade of dirty, skinny orphans. The sun was on its way down. Only a few minutes of fading daylight remained. Fred ran across the parking lot, headed for the shadows, and a long zigzaggy route back to his flophouse. He needed to gather up his equipment. He had to find Alistair Britton, sexton of Grim Tyrant Valley, and he had to find him fast. Britton might be the only person who knew the whereabouts of Quentin's mother and/or sister. Fred knew that, and now so did Ghoulie. That meant Ghoulie's employer knew it, too. But Fred also had names, had to ask around about Janine and Constance. Something told him asking about Killian was a bad idea. There was a reason that man had a blank military record. Fred couldn't be in 2 places at once. Right about now, that concept of a helpful assistant sounded better than ever. But maybe he could get some help. Not an assistant, just a one-time hire. He grabbed his gear and headed for the mines. Chapter 11. Carney. Enough people worked at the mines that slipping in among them was never a problem, and it never aroused suspicion. Even though Caleb had ceased to exist, no one gave Fred a second glance. Working as a one-man operation provided certain advantages. He didn't have to pay anyone else, he never needed to have meetings or corporate planning sessions, and he never needed to get anyone's approval to follow the best course of action. But it also had its drawbacks, the biggest of which was that he couldn't be in 2 places at once. Sometimes you just had to get help. Fred found Carney in the quarry, watching the evening pit fights, sipping stinger juice and cheering with the rest. Inside the circle, a burly, shockingly alabaster-skinned miner was getting his lunch eaten by a slightly younger man who obviously knew a thing or two about the ancient earth art of savate. Fred sidled up to Carney. "Caleb," Carney said quietly, almost conspiratorially. "What? Not here," Fred told the younger man. "I need to talk to you for a minute." Carney nodded, following Fred through the crowd and a few yards up the sloping quarry wall. When Carney spoke next, he was a little out of breath. Fred didn't think it was from the slight climb. "I figured you were gone, man. Not just from the mines, but maybe from the colony, too." "That's next," Fred said. "First, I need your help with something." Carney looked excited. "Sure, man. Anything." "I have a job for you. A job that will get you off of Makovy." "Away from Makovy?" Fred nodded. With you?" The young man would have to ask that. "No, not with me. The job pays enough for you to buy a ticket off this rock. Are you in?" Carney didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting all my life to get out of here. What do you need me to do? Is it dangerous?" Fred nodded. "Yeah, it is. I need you to ask around about 2 names. Janine Carbonaro, 30 years old, and Constance Carbonaro, 45. "Easy enough. I can talk to the guys around here, and—" "Not the guys," Fred said. "The girls. Talk only to the girls." Carney seemed confused. What girls? Why? Wives, daughters. Janine might not be around anymore, but she would have grown up here. She had to have friends. Constance was her mother, and I think Constance died 15 years ago. That means someone might have taken Janine in. If you want out of here, you have to ask around and find out. Why would anyone talk to me? Listen, you're a good-looking guy. Don't tell me the women around the mine aren't into you. Carney went from confused to embarrassed. Yeah, well, just try for me, all right? All right. I'll hit the market and the replenishing stations. A lot of the miners' wives and daughters work there. Thanks, Fred said. I appreciate it. I need anything you can get as fast as you can get it. I have to go take care of some business. You familiar with Mr. Sam's Barbecue? The place with the brisket? Yeah, I know it. Good. Look for me there tomorrow night, an hour after sunset. If I'm not there, just leave. Come back the next night and look for me again. If you don't see me that second night, don't bother, because I'm not around anymore. Carney's eyes widened. Not around? You mean dead? Fred laughed. I hope not. I mean, I just can't get to the restaurant and I'll track you down later, okay? Now, can you do this for me? Carney sighed. He looked relieved to know that Fred wouldn't be in danger. I can. He hesitated and then said, Who is she, Caleb? Why do you need to find her? I can't tell you. Can you trust me on this? Carney nodded, solemnly. I do. I trust you. Those words gave Fred a gnawing feeling in his gut and a distinct pang in his chest. He felt like he was using the kid. In truth, he was. Fred did honestly like Carney, probably more than he should, but he was exploiting the kid's feelings to get information. It was part of the job, but that didn't mean Fred liked it. Chapter 12. The Gravedigger. Damn, son, you can make this thing move! The tires of the sandrail skimmed the brittle, purple dunes with the wild speed of cannon-fired stones skipping across the surface of a pond. The rail topped 65 kilometers per hour just as the McCovey sun began to melt into the horizon. Fred piloted the desert vehicle as easily as he jockeyed the stick of the Archangel. He didn't attempt to steer as much as to keep it from launching into a barrel roll with each rise and fall across the 15-meter dunes. The rail was a rental, but he didn't think Mr. Nathaniel Cornish Sr. would get his security deposit back. The reason for pushing the throttle past the red line was beginning to gain on them. Another sandrail, larger and covered in armor plating, had tried to slice Fred's vehicle in half just minutes before. To Fred's right, strapped firmly into the passenger seat, the old gravedigger seemed to be having the time of his life. He was either unaware that they were under attack, or he'd ceased to fear death more than the boredom of his advanced age. Fred had gotten to Alistair Britton first. The old man lived in the desert, commuting over an hour each way to the graveyard he managed. Fred had found the old man swilling stinger juice in front of a dilapidated trailer that was slowly sinking into the side of a dune. Fred had been there only 15 minutes when they had both seen the sun reflecting off a much larger, much faster sandrail, clearly heading toward the old man's isolated home. Fred took 1 minute to explain why he'd come, 1 more minute to explain who he thought might be on that bigger sandrail. The old man had spent 5 seconds making up his mind to get the hell out of there. Their pursuer sandrail had more than armor plates. It also had a very powerful engine. Fred had bought some room with clever maneuvering, but in a flat-out sprint, his ride didn't have enough power to pull away. He was only seconds from being mowed down like so much roadkill. If the sprint wouldn't do it, he had to go back to what he did better than anyone else. He had to drive. Fred pushed the stick right, sending his lighter rail into a wide curve. The rail's thick tires kicked up an arcing fishtail of purple sand that caught the fading sun in a moving, sparkling wave. His pursuers tried to match the curve, their fishtail even bigger, even higher. Fred glanced back to see the big machine's blunt nose closing in, so he threw his body left at the same time he pushed the joystick in that direction. "Ugh!" the old gravedigger shouted as G-force slammed him tight against his restraints. The rail gracefully cut into the left-hand turn of the larger S curve. The pursuers again tried to follow, but couldn't quite match the tighter turn. Fred timed it, waiting for his vehicle to start ascending a dune face. "Hang on," he said, then pulled the lever for the brakes. Flat fins of metal shot out of the rail's bottom and dug into the thick sand. Fred's body slammed forward against the restraints as the rail ground to a sudden halt. With the squeal of metal and a head-jarring thump, the pursuing rail's left side ground along the rear right corner of Fred's rail. A secondary thump rocked Fred's rail forward to teeter on the dune crest, but the pursuing vehicle sailed past that crest and knocked off balance from the impact. It rolled sideways down the dune face, tumbling and spinning and kicking up huge sprays of purple sand. Fred pushed the brake lever back down, making the fins recede into their housing. He gunned the engine. His rail rocketed down the dune face. He swung left to avoid his still-rolling pursuers, then shot away at top speed. "High one's eyes," the old man said. "You kill 'em?" "We'll know if they stay put," Fred said. "If they start firing on us, probably not." The rail shot over a high dune and caught air before Fred expertly brought its wheels back to the downslope. The engine roared inside its sandproof housing. This was dangerous, deadly work, but he liked this machine. If he lived through this, he might come back sometime and do it again. It would probably be more fun if someone wasn't trying to murder him. "I thought you was going to kill us," the old-timer said. "But that move, you done this kind of thing before, boy?" "Sort of," was the fairest answer Fred could come up with under the circumstance. The day's light was rapidly fading. The rail's headlamps came on automatically, but Fred overrode the control to shut them off. For a few minutes, he lost sight of their pursuers. He even started to think they were in the clear. Then a cluster of lights appeared in the distance behind them. "Guess you didn't kill him," the old-timer said. "Guess not. I can't dodge them forever. We've got about a 5-minute lead at best. They're going to catch us." "Then what happens?" "I probably get tortured," Fred said. "You into that kind of thing?" Fred shook his head. "Nope." "Sucks to be you," the old-timer said. "What happens to me?" "You? Don't worry. They won't torture you. They'll just shoot you in the head." The old man spit out the side. "I figured, since I ain't into getting shot in the head," he pointed northwest, "maybe you want to go that way. We might make the decom grounds." "Decom grounds?" "Yep," the old man said. "Where the bats dropped all McCovey's heavy weaponry after the takeover. Bombs, missiles, mines, that kind of thing." "All that deactivated?" The old-timer laughed. "You're a picky one, ain't you? Some of it's deactivated. I figure maybe getting blown up by some old mine is better than definitely getting shot in the head. Unless you change your mind about digging torture, I figured your kind might be into that." Fred pointed the rail northwest. The molten mess of the setting sun was just off-center left, most of it already dropping behind the horizon. "My kind," Fred said. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Oh, give me a break, sonny. I've been around a long time. Just 'cause it's scripture to hate you don't mean it's the right thing to do. Scriptures also tell me I ain't supposed to eat round bug 'cause they're unclean, but I like me a good sandwich." It sounded like a conversation Fred might like to have sometime. Some other time, when he didn't have the lights of a hostile sandrail steadily closing in on his rear. Fred pushed his foot down harder, even though the acceleration pedal couldn't go any farther unless he kicked it through the floor plate. A few minutes later, Fred's rail crested a dune. Instead of seeing another dark sand wave ahead, the surface before him sloped down, down, and down. He was driving into a massive pit. Far ahead, at the bottom, he saw huge, dark shapes rising out of the sand. "High one," he said. "What are those towers?" "Ships," the old-timer said. "They buried some of those there as well." There were a few wonderful seconds of nothing but darkness behind them, then their pursuers crested the rim. Those same lights in his rearview mirror, only closer. And then a new light flashed. Instincts born in training and forged in dogfights kicked in. Fred cut hard left as he worked the brakes, bleeding speed and angling away from their straight path. A flash of light appeared in their original path, molten orange, followed by a cascade of liquid purple glass. "Hot damn," the old man said. "They're shooting at us." Fred turned the rail right, again pointing to the towering buried ships. He demanded the machine give him all the speed it had. The pursuers had not only recovered, they were firing a shucking plasma cannon. He had to get off the dunes. The closer the pursuers got, the less time he'd have to dodge the fire, and one did not survive a direct hit from a weapon like that. Whoever wanted the information Fred was chasing down wanted it badly. Firing off an energy weapon like that on a colony that was armed solely with nail guns was going to raise hell, even draw the attention of the Creterakian overlords who really ran the place. Whoever his pursuers were, they were willing to risk drawing a patrol of bats and their entropic rifles to bring Fred down. The dead ships rose up high in front of them. He'd served in the Corps. He knew that these ships weren't all that big. Maybe a couple of corvettes, the big one in the middle a frigate at best. But small, up in orbit, in comparison to the destroyers and cruisers, was a completely different thing down on the ground. Not far now. The rail's headlights played off a distant, battered wall. The old-timer pointed. "There! Aim for that crack in the fence!" Fred did. So close now. So close, if he could just dodge the next round. Another flash, bright against the early night sky far behind. Fred cut hard left and dropped speed, hoping the gunner was new enough to fall for the same trick twice. The gunner was not. A blast of energy erupted close behind and to the right. The sandrail's rear flipped high into the air. Up they went, flipping end over end, rising to the sky for a moment before gravity won that brief battle as it always did. The seat restraint slammed him into his chair, even as crash gel poured out of a dozen hidden nozzles, coating him in an already hardening goo. Beside him, the old gravedigger let out a loose cry of elation that was downright giddy. Time seemed to slow to a crawl for Fred. He certainly didn't feel giddy, but neither did he feel afraid or angry or even concerned. No, he simply experienced one of those moments in which you question how your choices have led you to wherever you found yourself. Somewhere beneath them, the decom ground's outer wall passed by. An eternal handful of seconds later, the spinning rail crashed into the decom grounds. That was episode number 3 of The Reef. Poor Fred. He just can't escape his past. And yet, there's some deep memory that he's keeping at bay. Maybe that memory is part of what makes him who he is. That memory ties in to this book's cover. We will see that memory later, so you keep listening. Before the episode, I told you that my nephew is in the NFL. Yes, he is! Tyler Sigler IV plays for the Arizona Cardinals. He is a safety. It's his rookie year. He's an unsigned free agent. Tyler played football at Division III Wheaton College in Illinois, where he did really, really well. But it's almost unheard of for a Division III player to make a final roster. Right now, he's on the Cardinals roster with 90-odd guys, but that roster has to get cut down to 53 before the first week of the regular season. So talking almost 40 guys are going to get cut, have their dreams cut short before the first game of the regular season. In his first preseason game, the first preseason game of the season, Tyler made a case for himself. He had 3 tackles. He had an interception with a 52-yard return. He was targeted twice. One of those he picked off. The other one, he held the guy to a 7-yard gain with no yards after catch. No yaks! For those of you who know about football. He was always in the right place, played real smart, did a good job. You want to see his interception? You can Google Sigler picks off Stick. Easton Stick was the quarterback for the Chargers. So that's Sigler, picks off Stick. Should be the first thing up that Google kicks up back for you. And that replay is at azcardinals.com. In short, he played great. He made the most of his first opportunity. We'll have to see if he can keep it up. If he doesn't make the final roster, it's amazing he's even there at all. It's rarefied air to be on a pro roster. If he's still there come week 1 of the regular season, he will have beaten the odds. What kind of odds, you say? Well, let me tell you one player in over 300,000 high school footballers makes a final roster in the NFL. 1 in 300,000. That is tall odds. We are rooting for him, of course. We are proud of him, no matter how this turns out. And that is it for this week. We will be back next week with episode number 4 of The Detective. And until then, we will talk to you all real soon. You have been listening to The Detective, a Galactic Football League novella. The Detective is also available as an ebook and as a full-length audiobook. If you want the whole story with no waiting, visit scottsigler.com/thedetective for links to Amazon, Audible, and more. Follow Scott on Instagram and Twitter, where he is at Scott Sigler, one word, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Scott Sigler. The Detective audiobook was directed by AB Kovacs and engineered by Steve Riekeberg. Copyright 2019, Empty Set Entertainment, all rights reserved. Theme music is from the band Amps and Volts.